We're going to first take HB 17 by Representative Emerson. It provides for closed party primary elections for certain offices. Welcome to the committee, Representative, and you may proceed. Let me put you on, I'm sorry.
We good? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I know you have not heard much about this bill. This is the party primary bill. We are seeking to institute a party primary election in the state of Louisiana, which is what most states actually use, is some sort of party primary system. Of course, there's lots of different kinds: open, closed, semi-open, semi-closed, such as that. But that's what we're seeking to do, and so basically we would have party primaries, and it would be they would have a nominee come from those parties and advance to the general election. One major reason that we're seeking to do this, and I know most of you guys have been here for a while, and you know that we've had bills before discussing the fact that our congressmen are often elected in December and have to wait a month to go to D.C. And start their service and getting their offices together. So it's kind of a disadvantage for them, and so that was one big reason that I sought to do this. So that's basically what the bill does. And I know that there are some amendments that I think are going to put it in the proper posture of some things we've discussed.
All right, the board is clear. Why don't we take up the amendments? Who has the amendments? Representative Miller?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Chairwoman Emerson.
Thank you, Senator Miller.
So, it's Amendment 79, and basically what it's going to do, it's going to have the effective date of the act is going to be 2026, and for all the elections in 2026 and thereafter for federal, congressional, U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, and Louisiana Supreme Court justices. No district judges, no appeals court judges, or any of the other offices. And also, what it will do, it will require the majority in the party primary to receive a majority of the votes in the party primary. So to advance to the general election. If there is a tie, it provides for that. And if there's anything that isn't covered by the statute in the election code, the central committee of each party would be able to determine how they deal with these circumstances. So that's the amendment, and I would, at the appropriate time, move for adoption.
All right. Are there any discussions on the amendment? Are there, Senator Jenkins for a question? Let me do this, Senator. Let me see if I can add to two of you. I'm hitting add, and then I press the other. I've done it. It wasn't that bad. All right. You may proceed, Senator Jenkins.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, my colleague from over in the House of Representatives that I was very pleased to serve with for many years. And I think if anybody look at our voting records, they're pretty similar, maybe just a couple of instances.
They're very, very similar, Senator Jenkins.
Just a couple of instances. But look, on the amendment, and I'm just trying to get some clarity on it. First of all, I do think this amendment is an improvement now on what I felt the original bill was going to do. And I'm just trying to, I hope that this question is germane of what we're doing here, because one of the things that I saw occurring here, and unfortunately, I just did not have enough time to vet this as well as I really wish I could have. We had been, under the gun with the redistricting of our Supreme Court in Congress. And so today is the first day I've had a chance to really begin to dig into it, call back.
I'm here to answer all your questions.
Absolutely, okay. So one of the questions that I was getting from those who had concerns about this was the price tag on it. And now that we've made this amendment and taken out certain elected positions, I'm wondering, do we now need to see a new fiscal note? Does that need to change? Is the cost that's involved with this going to change? Have you, as the author, or either the author of the amendment, looked at it from that perspective at all? Because this fiscal note here over a 5-year period is saying something around 15 million out of state general fund.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer the question. You know, I'm not sure exactly how it would change. It might actually make it less expensive, but you know, and part of the fiscal note is because of the 2024 election. It was going to apply to congressional elections this year, and my understanding was that was part of it. So I'm sure we'll get an updated fiscal note for it, but it won't. We won't need the money this year. So that's one of the. I think that's one of the things that's going to come into play.
And I'm sorry.
Can I make a comment? Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator Jenkins. So it's a couple of things. So first of all, I know you weren't necessarily referencing this, but we did have a supplemental appropriation bill that was going to cover the cost for the upfront cost if we were going to have the primary elections this year in August. The Secretary of State's office needed some upfront costs to prepare for that. So that was covered in the supplemental appropriation bill. Obviously, that's no longer needed at this point. As far as the fiscal note goes, the hope and the desire is to place these primary elections on already scheduled election days. I don't think it could potentially reduce the fiscal note a little bit because I think that some of those election days well, I guess starting in 2026 in the spring, which is when we were targeting to have these primary elections, they may not be totally statewide, so it you may need a little bit more, but we're planning to try to have them on the same election days that we already have scheduled.
Okay. Another question that was tendered to me to bring up today is why are we keeping the Supreme Court in the bill? We took out many of the other elected positions, such as Bessie and all of that came out, but is there some specific reason why the Supreme Court remains in the bill?
So, as you know, we started out with Congress, statewide elected officials, the legislature, Bessie, PSC, Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and District Court. All I can tell you is that obviously there's been a lot of negotiation back and forth and conversations, and this was what was Congress and Supreme Court. So obviously originally the bill was much broader. I would have preferred it to stay broader, but this is what was decided on, and I thank Senator Miller for the amendment.
Okay, and so we are passing maps out that's going to affect the Supreme Court. I do know that there's maybe one Supreme Court position that's going to come up in my area, I think, this year. So what, if any, impact now will this have on the Supreme Court race first, the one that may be happening in my area?
It will not, because the effective date would be to start in 2026.
So that race will still be able to move forward?
If it's this year, this would not apply.
Okay, so let me ask this question here. So how, and help me with this, how exactly will this work with Supreme Court districts? How would these candidates, there'll be closed primaries in each one of the Supreme Court districts, and each party is going to tender a candidate for that Supreme Court district that will go to a general election? Is that what the process will look like?
That is how the process would work, yes. And
Has anyone talked with anyone with our co-equal branch of government, the Supreme Court?
I believe
get a
some of them
feel
are
for
here.
this? Okay. But you as author, have you talked with them about the Supreme Court elections remaining in the bill?
So this amendment was just decided on today. So
Right.
I assume that we have some members of the Supreme Court who may be here, and I will be happy to speak with them.
Okay. Well, it would be good to know, because I do have a concern about the court remaining, or why the court is remaining in the bill when it appears that all of the other statewide and state elected positions basically have come out. I see the federal elections that are in here, but I do have some concerns about what's happening with that aspect of it. Now, that may be all the questions, Mr. Chairman, I have with the amendment, but I'm sure we'll have opportunities to talk a little bit more about the bill as
Yeah, happy
amended
to.
as we move forward, and I could hold my further questions until that time.
Yes, sir. However you so desire to proceed. So you want to hold up and,
Yeah, that way we could go back to the
I do
detail.
enjoy talking with you, so.
Absolutely.
all right. Are there any other, Senator Carter?
I was going to waive my questions so that we could talk about the bill in its entirety instead of just on the amendment like Senator Jenkins. I can do that so we can discuss it. Thank you.
All right. Senator Miller sends up amendments. Are there any objection to the adoption of the amendments? Hearing no objections, seeing no objections, those amendments are adopted. Now we on the amended bill. Senator Jenkins, you want to? All right, Senator Jenkins.
Yes, and once again, I know that some of this discussion may have taken place in the House, but we're over on the Senate side now. And
And I'm happy to see you here, so we are over on the Senate side.
okay, so so what we are doing, thank you. What I'm trying to do is tender questions here that have come to my attention.
Okay.
Since I began to really call and talk and see exactly what's going on. So I've heard from some constituents, and I do have independents in my district who feel as though this is not a good idea. Is there something you could say to those constituents to convince them that this is a good idea? They feel as though they would be left out of each step of the electoral process and will only be brought in the end.
Yes, and thank you for that question. I appreciate it. It was certainly a topic of debate on the House side. This is a party primary system. This is when the parties are selecting their individual party nominee. And much like if you're a part of any other organization, the members of that organization are the ones who vote in the boards and the chairman and the president and all kind of stuff. So it's a similar situation here. You have those members of that party who are voting in this party primary process and becoming that party's nominee. There is an opportunity for the parties to make a choice whether or not they would allow unaffiliated voters to vote in their party primary. And that would be the choice of the state central committee of the respective parties. And then we get to the general election process. And of course, everyone can vote in the general election process. That is when those party nominees are on the ballot, and that's when everyone goes to vote, much like we have presidential preference primary. We vote in the Republican presidential preference primary and the Democrat one. And then everyone goes to the general election ballot, and everyone goes and votes there.
Right, I understand. So, why, what is wrong with the way that we're doing it now? Because we generally come out with a candidate from each party that ultimately runs in a runoff election. I mean, how is this going to make it any different?
So I think with election processes, I don't know that you can say there's anything wrong or right. It's just a different way of doing things. And this is the way that most states do their process. They have a party primary process, and they come up with a nominee for each respective party that goes to the general election. There's pros and cons to all of them. There's different strategies to all of them. This is just the one that I think is a great idea. We've had a task force to study this. We've had bills brought before this legislature in this committee before. The former chairwoman of this committee brought this bill, and it was debated, not this exact bill, but a similar bill. And we did have a task force, I believe, in 2021 to study this issue. So it's not that this is necessarily a brand new idea. It's been debated a lot here and talked about a lot here. I think that everybody kind of felt like, you know, this was something worth debating, and I don't think it's necessarily a surprise that we're here talking about this today. The task force did actually come out with recommendations, and a lot of them are in this bill.
Are you aware or familiar with the fact that there is polling that has been done that talks about this subject, and that polling appears to indicate that a majority of Louisianians prefer the system that we have in place now? What would you say to those people that feel as though the system that we have now works, and they would like to keep that system in place?
So Senator Jenkins, I appreciate that. And the interesting thing about the polling process is that for every poll that says one thing, you might can have a poll that says another one. I mean, I remember in every single presidential election year, we've had polls that have said somebody was going to win and another person won. So the thing about polling is that there's a margin of error and it's an inexact science. And I can also show you another poll that tells me that people actually do like this process. It depends on how you collect that. Every pollster is different. Did they make live phone calls? Did they do text messages? Did they have the proper demographics in their polling? So I certainly appreciate that. And for everything that we do here, I think there's a large percentage of people that may or may not like it. So, look, I like I said, I can certainly appreciate the people who don't like it, and I think plenty of them are here to probably share their opinions about it.
There are some who feel as though whatever money that's going to be spent to deal with these closed primary systems could be put to better use. Roads, bridges, a whole lot of other things that the state want to do. Why would you, what would you say to those persons who are saying that maybe there are other priorities that the state should be looking at as opposed to changing the electoral system?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question. And look, I think that we have a very large budget and we debate those matters here all the time. Obviously, we have to pay for elections in this state, and whatever system we choose, that's what we have to pay for. Like I said, I do intend on trying to line up with election days that are already in place, and so we're going to do our best to do that so that it's not necessarily costing a lot more money. And then I think also, if you listen to some of the testimony in the House committee, of which I know you've been very busy, so you probably were not able to do that, but we had people from the State Department, the Secretary of State, and the Election Commissioner agree that we have more elections than most people. So I think we could probably look at doing some cleanup there and maybe have some cost savings in that situation. So look, I understand that. I certainly am not trying to put any great financial burden on the state. I agree with you. We are going to, we have a lot of roads and bridges and things to take care of in this state. And I certainly hope that we can find other ways to cut costs and save money and be more efficient in government as always.
Is there some specific reason why we need to do this now? I mean, some of the feedback that I'm getting is, why are we doing this now? We have a special session. Redistricting is hard, it's time consuming, and it needs
Yes,
a lot of
I
attention,
know.
and it still has ways to go. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but just so the public can understand all this. Is there some reason why we need to do it now? It looks like we said we won't implement it until 2026. Why can't this debate or this decision wait until our upcoming regular session that'll be a few months down, and give everybody an opportunity to get up to speed? How would you respond to that?
Well, I appreciate that question. And look, it was included in the call. And like I said before, this is something that's been debated a lot. Here's the report from the task force that was that we had in 2021. And like I said, a lot of the recommendations from this task force were implemented in this bill. So again, it was included in the call. I brought the bill. I think it's worthy of debate, and why not now?
Well, I guess I'm not supposed to answer the
No,
question.
of course, I'm not asking you
just
questions.
said,
It's rhetorical.
Because to me, something, of this significance to me, trying to take place in, short window of time with the other critical matters that we are trying to undertake, even for legislators, I think was a pretty big size role to swallow. I wish that I would have had more time to really vet this out a little bit more. I've only had brief conversations concerning all this. I remain.
Well, I'd love to talk to you, so you can come talk to me anytime.
But I don't think we're going to get it done between now and Tuesday on a subject like this, okay? But I remain, concerned about the Supreme Court remaining in this, in the bill. I do have concerns about that, but I do appreciate, you answering the questions, many of which questions was tendered to me to pass on. Mr. Chairman, with that, I tender.
All right, thank you, Senator Jenkins. Next, Senator Carter for a question.
Thank you. Good to see you, Representative.
It's always good to see you, Senator Carter. No
And
one
it-
works harder.
And you said something interesting to Senator Jenkins, that this is worthy of debate. It is, and I want to make sure I understand it. And I'm going to pick up with the Supreme Court with the closed primaries. I've been studying the issue more as it relates to the congressional districts, just because that's what we kind of took up first in this committee. But looking at the Supreme Court, let me tell you what I see in my concern, and how, and to like see if how we can work it through if we can,
Okay.
where at least I can explain the issue. The Supreme Court seat that we have in New Orleans is currently held by Justice Griffin. I'm a lawyer, so I know her. I knew her from when she was a state court judge, a district court judge, before she became a Supreme Court judge. Tried a case in front of her. But that seat that she has, it's an African-American seat. It's the only African-American currently serving on the Supreme Court. I know you're aware of this. This is the part I wanted to mention. Her seat was created through litigation. It was the Chisholm lawsuit, and the Chisholm settlement resulted in that case. And so I guess my question is whether or not there's been like any thought or conversations about how closed primaries for the Supreme Court could affect the Chisholm-created district that we have in the greater New Orleans area.
I have not had any specific conversations about any one area or any one Supreme Court district, no.
Okay.
This is because this is not about any one area or any one person or any one thing. This is about a holistic change, and frankly, like I said, most states do their electoral system this way,
No, listen.
a party primary process. to
And
be
I
clear.
appreciate that you didn't look at it from any particular justice's area.
Absolutely not.
And certainly not, let's just pick the random one from my district, which
Yeah, you know, I wasn't doing that. I promise you, Senator Carter.
I understand that. There are multiple versions of maps going around at the Supreme Court. I know we considered some in this committee. It's on at the Senate floor. We have Pineville, Mike Johnson's that we're considering next.
Speaker Pro Tem Mike Johnson.
Speaker Pro Tem, that's much better. Sorry, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I think he's okay with Pineville. And so I have in front of me just his map. So for his map that we have, just because it's happened to be in the folder, let me show you the concern that I see and see if you appreciate the concern. So if you look at the map from House Bill 8, which is Pro Tem Johnson's map, and I understand it's a holistic map. So looking at it holistically, there are things on here that, you know, I could tell is looking at it holistically, because there are things on here that the justices like, that multiple people like, including, for instance, the creating of another performing majority-minority district.
Sorry, I was just pulling up the map. I was certainly listening to you.
I was giving you time. I know you were. Like, for instance, District 7 is the current one for the Orleans area. It's not just Orleans, West Bank of Jefferson, and some, I believe, I don't know all the parishes, but it goes in that area. And then you also have District 2. District 2 is apparently would be a newly created African-American performing district. And then you have what seems to be a very up for grabs, so to speak, district, for lack of putting it a better way. There's an influential district created in District 3 where there's, I believe it's District 3, approximately 32% African Americans in that district. You see what I'm referring to? All right. Looking at the one for New Orleans, the one that's District 7, the current registered African American voters for District 7 provided if House Bill 8, Speaker Pro Tem Mike Johnson's bill were to pass, the registered African-American vote in that district would be 54.863%. You with me? The registered white Democratic vote in that district would be 35.615%.
Okay.
the total registered Dem in that district would be 60.164%.
Okay.
In New Orleans, we have Democrats, Republicans, probably less affiliated with party than other places throughout the state. For instance, we have many, and we have a very welcoming party in the Democratic Party. I want to make sure I make clear the Democratic Party is alive and well in the great state of Louisiana. Sitting next to my good friend Jay Luna right here, and some of my colleagues on the committee. But we also have diversity within the Democratic Party, African American Democrats and white Democrats. Assume with me in the election, because we're trying to figure out how would this perform, how would it affect the election. So if I have an election for one of the justice position in New Orleans, forgetting who the current justice is, just an open seat. And imagine if I have 3 African Americans who are running for that particular seat. And it's one, the seat is intended to be an African American seat by virtue of a settlement of litigation, the Chisholm seat. If those 3 African Americans are running for that particular seat, and there's a white Democrat in that seat, do you see the risk or the concern that the African Americans may compete for the African American vote, whereas the registered white Democratic candidate could perhaps solidify the white Democratic vote, giving them an advantage in that kind of an election where you have multiple African American candidates running for that multiple African American lawyers running for the seat, one white judge or lawyer running for that seat, and it creates a situation where the African American vote may be chopped up. The white Democratic vote may be solidified. I hope I'm not saying too much where you're losing me.
I'm not
losing
at all.
you.
I'm following.
Yeah, so.
I'm
That's
really tired, but I'm definitely following.
And so in a closed primary sort of situation, that election in a closed primary really puts at risk those African Americans from winning that seat, especially if you're looking at it from, well, if you look at it any sort of way. If you look at it from a plurality sort of way, if the white registered Democratic person has a consolidated base and the black candidates have it split up, then that really put those African American candidates at a disadvantage in a district that's created for them. Even if it's not a plurality and a majority sort of situation, we all assume there's going to be crossover votes for everyone. So if the registered Democratic vote is able to perhaps get some crossover vote from the African American community, then that white Democratic person.
I have to start taking notes because your
I'm
question's
sorry.
long.
So that's the concern. I want to make sure I explain
Yeah.
the hypothetical, and we could get into the weeds of how elections work and all the various factors, but
Did you? I think he just cut you off.
Oh, Senator, I made a mistake.
I think the overall question that I'm looking at, and I'm studying it for the not for the first time, but relatively new, that concern, and it's a legitimate one, that in a closed primary seat, the Chisholm seat, that can actually put at risk an African American seat. So I'm looking at the pro tem map, and I like the fact that it's creating additional seats and many things to like about it. But when you put this map in a closed primary system, then it raises some risk and concerns. I don't really have a question as much as I wanted to make sure I express that concern. And how would you address that if you?
Yeah. So I have several comments.
Sure, and
So-
I want you to, and it's a
okay.
conversation.
So first of all, obviously, as I stated earlier, this is certainly not about one particular area or one particular thing. This is holistically changing how we do this election process of having the party primary.
Yeah.
But I'll dive into your scenario a little bit.
If you understand,
Just because we've talked political stuff before like this,
Oh, no,
and
we're
I
friends, and I think
enjoy
it's-
the conversation with you.
And I think it's also important for the people to know that we've worked together in the past and that we're friends.
Absolutely.
And we've served together for now going on 8-9 years or something.
This is our
like that.
9th year together.
Yes.
It's been a long time. We both have like more gray hair. So, look, I think that
You're talking about me, but continue.
I cover mine up. So look, I think that the situation that you described is one that is solved a good bit by Senator Miller's amendment because we have a runoff, so you'd have to have majority. And so the situation where you have multiple candidates taking away from each other is a little bit solved by that scenario. I mean, I'm not asking you questions, but I think you would
yeah,
agree
I'm
that
listening.
helps. But, Senator Carter, I think that every single election scenario, you also have that. I mean, in our jungle primary, if you have 14 people running for the same thing and you have, 2 Republicans and 12 Democrats running, well, they're all going to take away votes from each other, and there's always going to be different scenarios that play out. So I understand what you're saying, but I think no matter what system you put in place, it's always going to be about strategy and about who's taking away votes from the other one. So I don't think you can say that this particular scenario is way worse than a jungle primary because you could have the same scenario in a jungle. Yeah. It just depends on who runs and how many. And, it's the same thing. And like when people ask me all the time and, 3 years out, who do you think is going to be president next? It depends on who runs on each side. And it depends on how many people are in Iowa. It depends on how many people are left when they go to New Hampshire. It depends on how many people are left in South Carolina. It's all about strategy and it's all about numbers.
And that's a very good, fair response. And looking at it, again, for conversation purposes, so we're trying to think through all those various scenarios. How does this compare with the current system that we have? How would this change things? How would this change the makeup of the court, the diversity of the court, with some very important things pending before the court? That's a true concern, and that at least from my perspective, I really want to make sure I understand it more fully before, it's hard to say, let's change the system on this on such short notice, especially given the science and the lack of science. I want to know the science. I want to be able to really think about it and try to get an understanding. Try to get an understanding. Price is interrupting me. Try to get an understanding of the effects of this. One of the other concerns that I'm hearing, and I heard you say a second ago that each party could decide whether or not the Democratic Party or the Republican Party wanted to allow independents to vote in our elections.
Unaffiliated voters,
Unaffiliated voters, yes. Unaffiliated voters. Mm-hmm. I'm hearing concern, though, from those voters that there could be a disproportionate impact on them, those unaffiliated voters, when it comes to their turnout, when it comes to perhaps voter confusion, when it comes how this may impact them. That certainly the party is going to be doing its best to turn out its party voters, Democratic voters, Republican voters, et cetera. But there's not going to be that concentrated effort on turning out those unaffiliated voters, as opposed to in a jungle primary system, as it's called, that we have. The focus is on turning out all the voters that we possibly could get to go vote, if that makes sense. So what do you think about the concerns of how this may disproportionately impact those unaffiliated voters?
So I understand those concerns. I don't know that there's not going to be a concentration on trying to turn them out, because in a general election, you need to turn out all of your supporters.
I think I meant disparate, not the other word that I use. But so if there's no effort to turn them out during the primary, then there's a concern that those are voters who are just not going to vote during those elections.
Well, again, this is a party primary process where the parties are selecting their nominee, and the members of that party are selecting their nominee to go onto the general election ballot.
Okay.
So we have a general election, and the candidates who are selected in those respective parties go on the ballot, and everyone votes.
I missed the hearing on the House governmental side. We're handling our own business at the side.
I know y'all have been very busy.
And I'm going to continue to listen today. And I'm sure that all of us can continue to have conversations about this.
Sure.
But my concerns are, how do we protect those performing African-American districts to make certain they continue to perform as African-American districts, whether it's an open or closed primary system, quite honestly. Whether it's this system A or system B, I want to make sure the result is equal representation for all people of the state of Louisiana. That's a concern.
And I appreciate that. I would just, again, point to the fact that most other states have a party primary process. And I believe when you look at all the states around the U.S., they have very similar situations with minority districts as well. And so I think when you look at it, they probably perform the same as the jungle would in that scenario.
And the other concern is the impact on those unaffiliated voters, But I'm continue to listen to the conversation. I really want to make sure I'm understanding it and I'm not missing something. I want to, because I see the concerns that I have when I'm looking at the numbers and making certain that we keep that representation
Understand.
fairly appropriated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Miguez for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Emerson, thank you so much for bringing your bill here today. Appreciate you bringing it forward. I have some questions for you, and I know you pretty well, and this is going to be just confirmation. You are a registered Republican,
I am.
and you are an active member of the State Central Committee on the Republican Party.
I've actually been that longer than I've been here in this building.
So you'd be the perfect person to ask this. When the party in the Republican that's on your name next to the ballot, is that just something that you put next to your name to get elected, or does it mean more to the people who are a member of that party?
Well, I mean, I think it tells people generally where my philosophies and values are.
That's correct. So you have a constitutional right of association to associate with a particular party.
I do.
And it would
We
be
all
your
do.
understanding that the Republican Party stands for a platform of certain ideological principles and values.
I
Would you
do.
agree? Would you agree
I do
that
agree.
the United States has been a two-party system for a number of years,
For
centuries?
quite a long time.
And that's something that's just natural to our process here in the United States.
It is.
Now, you also have some other expertise that not a lot of people know about. I understand that you're an expert in polling. Would you agree that you have a lot of knowledge and background?
An expert, but I've dabbled in it some.
So polls can be run to find out what people are thinking, correct?
That's correct.
But that's not the only reason why you run polls. There's other political reasons. Would you agree that I could run a poll for the specific purpose of maybe getting people to think about an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, kind of how you phrase questions can certainly make people think about maybe an issue haven't previously thought about. Yeah.
Could also run a poll and maybe release it at specific times to maybe influence people and maybe their positions on polls at times?
Well, Senator Miguez, I think that's certainly part of the process, and that. But in fairness, I think I think it's appropriate because I think a lot of times when we are debating these issues, it's good to know how people feel. But as I told Senator Jenkins, it's all in how you ask the questions. It's all in who answers the questions. It's all about the demographics and the weighting you do. It's all about the methods you use. If you're doing emails, text, calls.
Who might
everything.
have paid for the poll, which special interest has an agenda, when the poll was dropped, how the questions are asked. There's a
Senator
number of
Miguez,
reasons.
I'm not going to make that assertion and accuse
So there's-
anybody of anything. I mean, polls are out there, and I generally I try to
But
put
you
faith
stated
in pollsters and what they put out.
you stated that there's polls on both sides of this issue, released within the same week that tell a different
Sure.
story, correct?
Definitely, and again, I did look at both of those polls, and I think one of the pollsters is probably in here, and I respect him a lot. So look, I think it's the questions that you ask and how you ask them, and sometimes you have different outcomes. Again, we certainly saw, especially in 2016, there was a lot of different outcomes in polls, and that's not exactly what happened.
Well, let's move on from polls and talk about something that matters
I
more.
love talking about polls, but
And it's our constituency base.
Yes.
So you're the author of this bill, so I'm sure you talk to your constituents. And I'm sure you represent them. I imagine you talk to a lot of Republicans in your district, being an active member of the party.
I talk to everybody in my district: Republicans, Democrats,
Well,
Independents, all of them.
When you survey them informally, what are they saying about this issue? Are they complaining to you about certain complaints about the current top two jungle primary and why we have a need?
Yeah, so I think in general, I mean, it really depends. Some people certainly haven't really thought about it a lot, but if you do talk to them and kind of talk about the systems that are in place in other states and how those respective parties are able to choose their nominee, and the people who are in that party choose the nominee, it makes sense to them. I'm not saying everybody loves it, and certainly everybody doesn't love everything we do here. So, yeah, look, I think that it, like I said, it does make sense to a lot of people. It's, it's interesting, especially if people moved here from other states and they vote here now. A lot of people are quite confused that we have, multiple Democrats, multiple Republicans, multiple independents, what have you, on our jungle primary ballot. So it can be a little bit confusing as well when you have that. And again, when you have a very long, complicated ballot in the fall and people are going in there, especially if they're not high propensity voters, it can be quite confusing to try to figure out of 14, 15 different people, the candidate that they want to vote for.
Well, I can tell you when I'm talking to my constituents, particularly members of the Republican Party, I'm very active as well as you on the local level. And the biggest complaint I hear about our current primary system, or actually our jungle primary system, hadn't been mentioned much today, is time.
Yep.
About the time after the first election that they have time to settle in, get to understand maybe the people in the runoff that they might not have voted for. Those individuals get an understanding of where they are. Emotions get to sort of settle down. And enough time for, in this particular case, we talked about the freedom and the constitutional right of association, for these parties to come back together, these parties to unify and to think about what matters most. Not their personal ambitions, or not that they wanted to be in that particular position, but their political ideology, their love for their country, their love for their community. And as you know, if you've been involved in a lot of campaigns, they're very emotional, but it takes time. And when people give a little bit of time to get back together, those things, their children, the future of their state, come before all, and they come back to their senses. And do you think the current jungle primary at 30 days gives people enough time for their emotions to settle and to think in a right frame of mind to do what's best for Louisiana?
Well, look, it's certainly difficult. Whenever the elections are that close together, it certainly does cause some heartburn. So I think I'm glad you brought up that point. I think it gives a lot of time in between the primary and the general for people to kind of have an opportunity to speak with the candidate that is their party's nominee, and to really find out where they are and make sure that they want to support that candidate. Yeah.
The other complaint I get a lot of times is I have a right to associate, and I'm talking from I'm a Republican, a Republican's aspect, and I chose to be a member of a particular party. I want a candidate that reflects my ideology, the platform we talked about earlier, the party that I decided to associate with. And don't you think that those parties have a right to pick their preferred candidate that matches the ideology and the platform of their party?
I do.
That's
one of the main reasons I brought the bill.
Also hear complaints about, by allowing those that have chosen not to associate with that particular party, it could be Republican or Democrat, that they could dilute that individual's voice in that party primary system and result in a candidate that may not reflect their values as deeply as their convictions are.
Look, it's certainly possible, and again, it will be the respective party's decision of whether they allow unaffiliated voters to vote in their primary.
Now, let's talk about no party voters. And obviously the members know there's a difference between an independent, for the public out there. We use that term very generally. An independent is a person that's a member of a party, correct? There's an independent party here in Louisiana.
Independent party.
So a non-affiliated, no party voter.
Yep.
Do they still have a right to vote in a closed primary system?
The no party voters would have a right to vote in the system if the respective parties chose to allow them to vote and participate in their primaries.
Do they still have a right to associate with a particular party if they decide?
Certainly.
But would they've made a conscious decision not to associate with a party for their personal ideological views or their personal reasons, right? They have that right.
They do have a right to associate with a party.
So you do agree that
certainly
someone,
if they would like to vote in that party primary, they can do so.
So you'd agree that someone has a right to associate just as easy as they have a right to not associate?
Sure.
We talked about, there's some comments made about money earlier, that the money could be used better for other reasons. Don't you get understanding sometimes, and after going through the crazy budget process that we had last year and watching billions of dollars spent on sometimes unnecessary projects, that sometimes here in the legislature, when we dislike a particular idea, we can we cherry pick when we're going to be, let's say, fiscally conservative at times?
Yeah, look, Senator Miguez, I think that you brought up a good point. We do send millions and millions of dollars to different projects that I probably wouldn't fund if it was just me making the decision, but we're certainly a body of many, and so that's how we do things. But yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the cost of elections, I think it's on the fiscal note that a statewide election costs roughly $7 to $8 million. So, yeah, I can think of a lot of different things that we've spent $7 to $8 million on here that it's probably not worth it.
Wouldn't you agree that it's in law that the state of Louisiana, through its appropriations process in the legislature, is charged with funding our elections process solely? And it's part of our public policy to protect the integrity of our election system,
And it is.
that we are charged with funding that first?
Yes. Well, I don't know about first
Yeah,
as
you
far
know,
as priorities, but yes,
priorities,
we
yes.
are charged with funding it, yes.
So let's talk about something that hadn't been talked about either, and it deals a lot with, every politician thinks about this: self-preservation, incumbency. Do you have any data or statistics that show that putting a closed primary system would affect an incumbent's ability to get reelected?
Senator Miguez, it's like I told Senator Carter, I did not look at any particular person or any particular potential race that this would affect. This is about a holistic change in the state that is very similar to what other states do and what most states do, in fact, having a party primary process.
And
Not
incumbents
this
get,
exact one, but
do
having a
incumbents get
party primary
elected on a
process.
regular basis in those states on their closed primary system?
I mean, yeah, incumbency is, as we all know here, it's pretty powerful. I mean, you are there and people know what your voting record is, and if they like it, then they hopefully will send you back.
They also talked about time. Why do this now? But wouldn't you agree that the Secretary of State's office needs some amount of time to change the type of primary system that we use and to basically implement different changes in our election system? Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be better if obviously this bill is very important to the governor, correct? I've heard him make a lot of public statements that he supports.
I heard him mention it in his speech on the opening day of session, yes.
He also mentioned his speech about
Talked about it in the media a little bit, too.
and reform in Louisiana and in the legislature over the next 4 years, having to understand the concept that we will be changing things, we will be reforming things, but we're going to do those with Louisiana's best interest at mind for the future of Louisiana, for our children. And this is just the first step, and this is one of the changes that he suggested. So don't you think that we need time to implement these types of reforms? And why wait? Why not start now? Get our Secretary of State's office understanding this. And the way the bill is structured now, personally, for the record, I would support your bill in the original format, including all the different offices and elected officials that you mentioned earlier. But I understand that this is a place of compromise. I understand that our Secretary of State's office is a big undertaking for them. But why not start now? That's my point.
Senator Miguez, I appreciate those comments, and as you know, we've worked really, really hard to get this bill in its posture, and I feel comfortable with where we're going, and I hope that you'll vote favorably on it.
Yeah, and then this is, would you consider this bill perfect today? Or we'll never have to touch
There are
this
no
again?
perfect bills around here.
So as we implement this process and we learn from the implementation process, we're going to find some things, and we'll probably come back and make changes to make this a more efficient process in the future.
Yeah, I think every single time we do any type of major changes in this state, that we often have to go back and see if, there's things we need to clean up or change. And as we implement them, if we find something's not working well and we need to change it, we do.
And I respectfully just have a different position than Senator Jenkins. I think we should start right away. And I appreciate you bringing this legislation before us, and thank you for all the hard work, and thank you for listening to members' concerns along the way.
Thank you, Senator Miguez.
All right, Senator Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I expressed my concerns about the Supreme Court. All right. Now, communications is coming to me that the Supreme Court has not had a discussion about this bill.
Okay.
So do you think that a transformative bill such as this, that's going to affect a co-equal branch of government, don't you think that opportunity for that discussion should take place?
So, Senator Jenkins, I realize that the federal level and the Supreme Court districts are what is left in this bill. But again, it started with a lot more in it. and I would have liked to have seen it stay with a lot more in it. This was not about one particular branch of government or any particular office. I think that we are charged here in the legislature with deciding how we conduct elections in this state. So it is certainly no offense to anyone on the Supreme Court. I think we have wonderful Supreme Court justices, and I appreciate their great service and jurisprudence. And so I appreciate everything that they do. But again, the legislature is charged with this duty.
I do understand, and I know that we are charged with the duty, but with another branch of government, and we are now going to change the way that they are elected. It just seems to me that time should be permitted for that branch of government to weigh in on what the issue is, and that remains to be a concern to me about what we're doing here with the bill.
Well,
Not the only concern, but
sure.
it's a major concern.
I believe I saw some of them here, so I'm sure you will hear some of their concerns.
Right. Well, if they come to the table, I guess we will. I'm not trying to bring anyone up, but
No problem.
I'm being the communication I'm receiving from the person who is the chief officer of that court is that no opportunity has been afforded, and I just find that to be alarming. I really, really do, especially if we're going to change the way that another branch of government is going to be elected. Just like I would be somewhat dismayed if a case came out, Supreme Court case came out and said, we want to change the way a legislator is going to be elected. So that concern remains with me. But I do appreciate your candor and what you have worked to bring forward here. I do understand this is something very important to the governor. So I do not take that lightly. This is a new governor coming in. I know he has an agenda, and I've had an opportunity to have a conversation with him and express what my concerns are. So I do not take this lightly, and I just really do not think that we're doing ourselves good to take this up at this particular time, with even members of the legislature are trying to embrace the idea and need time to talk with their constituents about it and others that may be affected by it. But thank you for
Appreciate that. Thank
coming
you.
forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Senator Jenkins. The board is now clear. We do have 29 emails in favor of HB 17, none in opposition. Let us first take the representative. Let's take those who are here who wish to speak in favor of the bill.
All right, let's do it. Thank you all.
Charlie Buckles would close primary task force. If you come forward.
Thank you. Charlie Buckles, Lafayette, Louisiana. And Senator Fields, thank you for allowing me to be here as committee chairman, the members. I very much enjoyed serving with you on the closed party primary that we had a couple of years ago. As a former member, just like to point out a couple of things that I know we discussed at the time. One of them would be kind of addressing part of what Senator Miguez has talked about is really what are we looking at in closed primaries? What we're talking about is the voters of the individual parties having a nominee that more aligns with them, so that we're talking about the philosophy of governing. That's really what we're talking about when it comes to the different parties, so that voters can more clearly understand when they go to the polls that these candidates are espousing certain philosophy of governing as opposed to the other party, getting the personalities more out of it, giving the voters a more informed decision as to who they're voting for. We have a number of states where we're only one of 3 states that do it like this as a jungle primary. There are about 14 states that have true closed primaries. One of them I'll point out is Pennsylvania. We've heard that, well, this could give us some problems in how we handle no-party voters, or could it elect people on one end of the spectrum or the other. I think Pennsylvania is a great example of that. Certainly doesn't exhibit any issues for that. They've got 1 million voters that are unaffiliated with any party. Those voters in Pennsylvania actually cannot vote in any of the closed primaries. They go directly to the general to vote. I think a number of us here would certainly agree that there could be an opportunity for no party voters to be able to choose which party primary they would vote in, and I think a number of us would certainly agree with that. But I do think this will encourage more people to run for office. It'll be less costly because when you run for office the first time, you're talking to your own voters. You're not talking to the whole universe of voters out there. So I think it's going to give you an opportunity to give a clear message to the voters. I think it'll encourage more voters to come out. In fact, in the states that have closed primaries, they typically have a better voter turnout than the so-called jungle primary states. So I think it does offer that opportunity to be a better educational tool for the voters. Certainly, I would support the bill as it was originally intended, but I know in our closed primary task force, I think the final decision there was to go with the federal races at that time. But certainly at this level, it's the opportunity for us to start educating the people in the state as to how to operate within a closed primary system and operate with a better understanding of the philosophy of governing. I think it'll be a great thing for our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buckles. Appreciate you coming to testify. We have two remaining individuals who wish to speak in support. Ms. Mary Sue Ryu, if you come forward.
Okay, short and sweet.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm Susie LaBrie, and I'm representing myself. And I have had a lot of experience in party politics, campaigns, and legislative activities for well over 50 years, almost 55 years. And I've had experiences in a closed primary system in the past of all the parties. I am for House Bill 17, closed primaries. First, it facilitates unity and harmony in the parties. It prevents divisions in the parties. Number two, it allows for candidates to be more specific, clear, and firm on their issues and platforms. Number three, it moves power more to the local level and resolves more issues at a local level. Number four, party discipline, meaning clearer party platforms and easier match of candidates and parties. Number five, it provides easier resolution to conflicts from within. Number six, it shifts the focuses to issues that really do matter, specifics and less general watered-down platform of issues of collectivities. This comes from our personal campaign experience and party activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming and testifying. And lastly, we have
Thank you.
thank you very much, Mr. John Kuvion. Come forward, sir. Please identify yourself for the record, and you may proceed. Now, I have a white card. You said you would like to speak, so you can proceed. It's not in favor or against, it's simply information.
Purely to provide,
I get it. There we go.
purely to provide information, Chairman Fields.
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Okay. Chairman Fields, members of the committee, thank you very much for having me here today. John Kuvion, James Sandlicks, and Polling. For those of the four of you on this committee, and of course I won't say which four, who have not worked with me before, I'm a pollster who has been in business for 14 years. I've conducted over 1,000 polls across our country, one of which was used in consideration of who should be allowed on the stage in the Milwaukee debate for the Republican debate. But the reason I'm here today is not to talk about the merits of the bill, the lack thereof, but to talk specifically about a poll which was conducted which was to seek public opinion not only about the current system, but about the proposed changes that are being contemplated by Representative Emerson in HB 17. There's several points I'd like to make about the poll. Some of the poll consisted of money issues, which I had addressed those in the Appropriations Committee. The substantive/policy type questions that were seeking Louisianians' attitudes about the open versus the closed primary system, that is the core of the discussion today in today's committee. More specifically, the open primary system and the terms of the open primary were described in the poll question. The open primary is favored by 65 to 20% margin. And the thing about that, which I found not only in this question, but in the other questions in the poll, was that you had minimal differences of opinion, whether we're talking about race or party or gender or geographic region of the state. So the open primary was favored by 65 to 20% margin. The poll also sought opinions from Louisianians about the possibility of going to a closed primary, which of course we did briefly in 2008 and 2010 for congressional races only. That is opposed by a 56 to 26% margin, again with similar numbers regardless of race, party, gender, geographic region of Louisiana. The third point is we specifically asked respondents if they believed that somebody should be elected with 50% of the vote, which of course is the system we have here in Louisiana, the runoffs. That concept was supported by a near unanimous margin of 84 to 7%, again with minimal differences by the various demographic groups. The final concept, which realistically is the most important one that those of us on the committee and in the Senate and the House have to consider as you consider legislation, which is, if I support or oppose this legislation, would someone be less likely to vote for me? On that subject, Louisianians were unequivocal. By a 54 to 20% margin, they said they would be less likely to support an elected official who supported making changes to the open primary system. So when we're talking about the attitudes that we have, not only were the numbers fairly one-sided with regards to support of the current system, opposition to the proposed system, as well as being less likely to support an elected official who contemplated these changes, the thing that's important to appreciate here is that there is a consensus. In other words, regardless of the chatter that you may be hearing, when we're talking about rank-and-file Republicans, rank-and-file Democrats, rank-and-file independents, who, by the way, are 28% of the vote, there is pretty much a consensus of opinion, or one could argue a lack of kind of a desire to make any change. You could basically say this is a variation of the One Louisiana that's become the theme of our state ever since the inauguration. So in conclusion, what we're talking about here is there is widespread satisfaction with the status quo with this system and a lack of a desire for change. And I'd be more than happy to take any questions from this committee.
Senator Jenkins for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, sir, for coming forward with that information. So when was this poll conducted?
The field dates of the poll was December 17th to 19th.
This past
Correct.
December?
2023, yes.
And as far as the sampling of the poll, can you tell us a little bit about that, the demographics of
The sample composition?
Right.
Yes, I'd be happy to discuss that. So we had a sample size of 650 likely voters across the state of Louisiana. We had 70% of the respondents were texted cell phones, 30% were from live dialed landlines. The racial breakdown was 66-28 white-black, which is quite similar to the electorate that has been voting in Louisiana for the last few election cycles. The party breakdown was 39-38 Democratic-Republican, which again is substantially similar to Louisiana when you're talking about voters who actually participate in elections going all the way back to the 2020 presidential. Finally, when we're talking about the last two pieces of demographic information, which would be the gender and the geographic distribution, it was a 52% female sample. The geographic distribution approximately represented the various media markets of the state. So, for instance, I see to my left Senator Luno, that would be Alexandria media market, or Cenla, is 5%. The Shreveport media market would be 11%. The New Orleans media market, which basically stretches from Bogalusa all the way almost to Morgan City, that was 36%. We had 21% from the Baton Rouge media market, 14% from the Lafayette media market, 5% from Lake Charles, and 8% from Monroe. So that's the breakdown of the sample.
So this was a statewide poll.
That's correct.
Obviously, and seemed to be pretty balanced based upon the makeup of the electorate.
Yes, the likely voter electorate.
Right, that are involved with all of this. And you conducted many polls, it appears, based on your testimony here today.
Over 1,000, yes.
Right. Was anything done in this poll to try to drive the answers a certain way, or was
No.
you?
And actually, the good news about that's a good question to ask, because one of the things that was stated in testimony earlier was the thought about, perhaps you could have different poll results derived depending on how you ask the questions. That's certainly a common accusation that is leveled against pollsters in general and me specifically. My response to that is it is a good thing to ask of us. And so that is why I published the content of the questions, which basically is seeking information as opposed to seeking to push the respondents towards one response or another. Because the important thing is, given that this is me trying to provide information to the committee, the thing that's important is you have to have decision, whether it be through a House bill or a Senate bill or an election campaign. You need to have information to make an intelligent decision as opposed to information that tells you what you want to hear.
So, in summary, would you agree that this poll seems to support, strongly supports, the open primary system that we have in place in Louisiana at this time?
I would. There's a level of comfort with the current system. And briefly veering from giving information, one of the things that those of us who dealt with the primaries back in 2008 and 2010, you did have people, you have to remember, when you have 30 years under one system, which was the open primary system going back to, I think it was 1977, and then the rules were changed in 2008 and 2010, imagine trying to go vote in a congressional primary, and all of a sudden, if you were a Democrat or independent who wanted to vote in a Republican primary, you're basically told, too bad. And there was enough of that happened that you'll remember that the law got changed pretty quickly after 2010, and by 2012, we went back to the current system that we have today.
Right, I was just about to ask about that. What happened?
And one more thing, Senator Jenkins, terribly sorry
No,
to take
go
up
ahead.
your time. Your part of the state was impacted not only by the party primaries, but the fact that with Hurricane Gustav barreling across the state, everything got pushed back a month. So you'll remember the 4th Congressional District, even as people were voting for Barack Obama or John McCain or Mary Landrieu or John Kennedy, they were voting for the Democratic and Republican runoff candidates as opposed to there being a general election. So we're talking about the merits of turnout. One of the things that happened, and some of this I will admit to you was due to extraordinary events, which was a hurricane, the turnout in December for the general elections in the 2nd of the 4th Congressional Districts was abysmal.
And you brought up something I wanted to ask about, and I really had intended to ask the author about this, but I'm going to ask you, you may know something about it. So we had closed primaries in 2008, 2010.
Yes.
What happened? How did we come back to open primaries if that was such a preference at that time?
This will be 20%, maybe 30% speculation, but what I think happened was, you'll remember in, I think it was 2011, that then Representative Hunter Green introduced the bill to change us back to the closed primaries, which of course happened in the federal races in 2012. When you have legislation like that that's basically correcting something in place, my suspicion is you had enough people who were not comfortable with the change to where they wanted it changed back. And like I said, I remember stories about people who were trying to go vote for a Republican candidate, but because they weren't registered that way, they couldn't. And the thing about it is, most of the time, with the lone exception of presidential primaries, party registration does not really matter per se in our state. And so a lot of people, they probably registered this a certain way, say in 1975, and changing their registration is not exactly on the to-do list with the registrar. So there was, I think there was a sufficient amount of confusion to where there was that impetus to make the change, which impacted the 2012 elections.
And I mean, to the best of my recollection, it appears that in most of these congressional races and others, you generally end up in a runoff with a Democrat and a Republican. There may be some exceptions, but most of the times, both of the major parties, that is, have some candidate that are involved in those races. Would you
Yes.
agree?
Yes, and that in fact is what happened in the 2nd and the 4th and the 6th congressional districts, which is where I recall you had the most activity going on with these congressional, well, and you also had the 3rd district, which back then was South Louisiana. But yes, in those congressional races, you did have a Democrat and Republican. But one of the quirks about the system back then was that if you were, and I'm going to use the term loosely, whether we talk about independent or no party or libertarian, most of the time, those candidates got a free ride into the general election, and all of a sudden you had the one Democrat, one Republican, and several no-party candidates. Technically, Congressman Joseph Gow and John Fleming were elected with less than a majority because of the presence of those third-party candidates.
And Congressman Joseph
Gow.
Gow.
It's spelled CAO, but it's Gow.
Right. But, and he would have been down in New Orleans, if I recall.
Correct. He defeated William Jefferson.
And he defeated William Jefferson out of that closed primary system.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for the information.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Senator Jenkins. Thank you, sir, for coming to testify. I'm sorry, can you stay at the witness table? Senator Miguez for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had to walk out for a second. Didn't get a chance to hear who commissioned and paid for your poll.
So this was a poll that was commissioned by Republic Renewal, their
Okay,
national group.
And any other information you could provide, who this group is? Just curious.
Their national group, they're registered with the FEC. I know that on a local level, former Senator Rick Ward is working on this effort as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, are there any current or former legislators or anybody in the federal Congress, U.S. Senate that you worked with on putting this poll together?
Not the elected officials. This was actually something I was working with Republic Renewal because basically my philosophy about poll construction is it's really a collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. In other words, they had some concepts they wanted tested, and I had an idea about, okay, if you want X, Y, Z to be tested, here's how I think the poll questions should be worded in a neutral and objective manner.
And you mentioned former Senator Ward's. What was his role in the poll?
None. He's basically been working on, I guess, the communications, and he's been doing media interviews with me.
Okay, so he helped coordinate the poll or helped coordinate the PR behind the poll?
No, he came on later.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Senator Miguez. Thank you, sir, for coming to testify. We do have two cards in opposition, Mr. Barry Ivory and Mr. Michael Wolf. Mr. Wolf, I have a question for you. You have two checked, and do you wish to testify or not? Michael Wolf.
He asked me to hand his card. He had to go because he
Okay.
time, so, and
All right.
Mr. Procopio go first. Do you have a card for me?
No, I do not. I do have a card from Barry Ivy, former representative, and
Yield first to my friend who he should.
well, I don't have a card. I don't have a card from him. So, Barry, why don't you come up? We do have a card from you. Let's get started. Yes, sir.
We go to the 3-minute rule.
All right. Welcome back to the legislature, Mr. Ivory.
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Thank you,
Also,
members.
before you do, we also have Bert Collis, I think it is, Collis, from the West Baton Rouge our Republican Party in support, do not wish to speak. Thanks for coming, sir. Please proceed.
Okay. So, I am Barry Ivy. Some of you may know me. I appreciate your time and attention, and I would like to ask that each one of you distinguished individuals, please remember that I'm and treat me like a citizen and not Representative Barry Ivy. So I've got over 25, 30 hours in preparation in dissecting this bill. And my comments are not meant to impugn intentions from the author of the bill. Obviously, creating legislation is a process, many stakeholders involved. And as Ms. Emerson, or Representative Emerson stated earlier, she's tried to make everybody happy, and that can be an impossible task sometimes. So I appreciate her diligent efforts in on this bill. I want to first state that this bill is being introduced in an extremely compressed, extremely compressed time constraints in this special session. This piece of legislation, in my opinion, is of a most significant and consequential nature. It will absolutely reshape the direction of our state for better or worse. And what we're doing is we are forcing a bill that where the people of our state deserve a legitimate opportunity to participate, to understand what the bill's doing. We already had a substantive amendment set presented to this committee after the bill was introduced in this committee. I've been able to re-engross most of it, but not all of it. And if everyone hasn't taken the time to do that, well, then I don't think anyone can state with certainty what the bill actually does. I mean, people can say it, but I don't believe that what's been stated so far is actually supported by the amendment set itself. The subject of party primaries is an absolutely legitimate subject before this body, but I believe it deserves the proper time and attention that the people of the state are not being afforded right now. Governor Landry issued on January 12th an executive order that declared a statewide emergency for the weather. That executive order was to stand from the 14th, I believe, through the 17th, which is in the heart of this process. Like today would be the first day outside of that executive order where the general public could come and testify. And as demonstrated by the cards that were presented here, very few people have been able to attend or participate in a process that is it's the foundation of. It affects the foundation of how we choose to elect people to represent us in public office. Now, while the amendment set may be intended to, eliminate the legislature and a few others from the bill, I can't tell that it actually does that. The part that it removes is the one to advance the process starting in or whatever it was. So I'm not even sure that this bill actually takes out the legislature. I haven't done the last few, but anyway. So that's a great concern for me right there. There has been so many gross misrepresentations about this bill, about this subject matter. And I would like to provide some clarification on some of them. This bill goes beyond creating, everybody's been saying party primaries, party primaries. Well, there's such a thing called open party primaries and closed party primaries. This is a closed party primary bill. People say that, we have a jungle primary and we're just, outlier. Look, our state is an outlier state across the board in every arena, just about. But what we'll do is we'll take the pendulum of us being a jungle primary state and literally bring it 100 to the exact opposite extreme end of a closed party process. And I'll demonstrate that in just a second. So this bill goes beyond creating a closed party primary system. It will be the most restrictive electoral process in the nation, I guarantee you. The bill, and again, obviously the bill's been amended, but there's been multiple members state on the record that they prefer the bill as it was originally postured in this committee. And so there's some correlation, even though it may not technically affect legislative races, it still is the same impact. So fallacy number one, everyone can vote in the general election process. That's a quote from the author. It's been quoted by many supporters and proponents of this bill. Guess what? It's not true. Everybody's saying it's like, well, shouldn't the party, if I'm an R, shouldn't I be able to elect my, candidate of my choice? I mean, it sounds like it makes sense on face value, but here's what the reality says. And look, members, I have provided a packet of information for you if you care to look at some of the details. So again, I'm gonna use the legislative, because I spent a lot of time putting this legislative race together as an example. So 69 this is in the 2023 primary, October 1923 primary. 69 legislative seats ran without opposition. There were 35 seats where only R's, Republicans, registered for that seat. there were 12 legislative races where only Democrats registered for the race. And then there were 28 legislative races where either a combination of a D and R, or a R in another party, or a D in another party, or all three. So there were only 28 of those races that would have actually yielded a general election. And even when you add, and one of the gross defects was the fact that there was no second party primary, as was originally outlined in Act number 560 of the 2006 regular session, which the chairman authored the bill. It did have a second party primary, so it will require a majority vote to get in the primary. However, even if you had if there is ever a race where only one party participates, then if there's two candidates in that race, then guess what? In the first party primary election, it's over. There is no general election. And so statistically, contested races, there were 75 total. So that's 52% of all legislative seats had contested races. And then under the general, for a general election under HB 17, only 37% of the contested races would have went to a general election. But the people can participate in the process. There are opportunities at the general election, but there's nothing in this bill, in its original or its amended posture, that ensures people will be able to participate in the process. In an example that is relevant to the amended bill, the October 2019 primary, the state Supreme Court District 1 only had Republicans qualify for that race, 2 or 3. Guess what? Voters will be disenfranchised. They will never get to see a general election. They will never get to participate in the process. Major defects, recognize political parties. Now, one of the other items in your packet is actually a list of all of the candidates for the 2 congressional races that were ran under our closed party system. What you will see is that you've got people from the Libertarian Party, the Reform Party, Republican, Democrat parties. You have the Green Party represented here. This bill is so restrictive, and it cannot be so restrictive on accident. It has to be intentional. That we take, and again, if you look at the statutes that I have on a sheet right here, one with all the statutes, 441, we say political parties or recognized political parties are defined based on Title 18, Section 441, subsection C. Well, what is that? Well, that's this bizarre, you have to have 5% of a presidential election or 5% of a statewide election with a third party or one of the non-affiliated parties. That is an impossible threshold. It will never happen. It will never happen. But we have B, 441B says if you've got 1,000 people, registered, blah, blah. So we have the independent party. Senator Miguez mentioned we have an independent party, except for, guess what? The independent party under this bill will not be able to participate in the party primaries because it doesn't meet the thresholds of 441 subsection C. So so now we're really going out of the way to disenfranchise voters, okay, and their ability to participate because these parties it will only forever be an exclusive D versus R on the ballot. It is statistically impossible almost to actually have another third-party candidate introduced. But let's just say you met the threshold of getting 5% in a presidential primary or a presidential election or a statewide election. Well, guess what? Now you have to repeat that every 4 years. You have to have that happen at least once every 4 years for you to continue to be considered a recognized party. So we have a section of law that identifies recognized parties, except for we say, no, we're not going to really recognize you. Well, then what are they for? What are they for? And so, again, that's rhetorical. Thank you.
All right, let's start wrapping it up, Mr. Representative.
Okay. So other major issues, the nominee petition. So the whole point of the nominee petition process, which is outlined in 465, that process has only ever existed as an alternative means of qualifying, because who would rather spend $500 to qualify versus going to have to get 500 or 1,000 signatures? The only reason this section exists is to give individuals who want to run for office, who do not have the financial means, a means to do that. That's what it's for. However, in this bill, very differently to the chairman's original closed party primary bill, where that allowed for all of the recognized parties, this is a full list, to simply qualify all the same way. But now we say you can only get nominated through a petition. But it gets worse, because the nominee petitions, as it exists in current law and will apply to every other office, says you can go get a signature from any voter. But now we're saying 2/3 of the voters that you now have to go get 500 signatures, 400 signatures, or 1,000 or whatever it is. But guess what? We're going to take away 2/3 of the voting base. So now you have to literally hunt down every single voter that is on that exclusive limited list and get them to sign off for you just so you can run for office. It is an impossible standard. Winning by a plurality, this bill allows for winning by a plurality. Even with the amended form, even with the second party primary, it's a smokescreen, because again, if you had 5 people in one party and one person gets the majority vote, it's over. There's your primary, general, it's all done, and the voters get it disenfranchised. So with that, members, this debate needs to happen, but it would be wrong to pass this piece of legislation this special session. It would be wrong. And I believe the voters, if you look at the last the last election cycle that we were all, or I say that I lost on, that y'all obviously won on, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the.
All right.
So there was only 36-point-something% participation in the general in the primary, and 23-point-something% of participation in the runoff. And this bill is supposed to make all the people, that 1/3 of the registered voters, come out and vote in the general. No, it won't. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so very much. And there, Senator Carter for a question.
Thank you. More than a question, more of a comment. We all had the pleasure, well, I think everybody up here except for 1 or 2 persons had the pleasure of serving with you. And I just want to thank you for a moment of personal privilege to thank you for your continued advocacy on behalf of the people of this state. I think you served well when you were in this body, and I'm so glad that we still have. Is not your twin, right?
It is me. I don't think he could deliver this presentation.
And I certainly want to acknowledge the good work that you're doing in bringing these important issues. And I certainly am paying attention to the part where you talked about the abilities for independent or unaffiliated voters that petition process, and the constitutional concerns, the voting rights concerns about that piece. But I just want to make certain that I acknowledge you for not just serving well, but continue to be an advocate as a private citizen. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Representative, for coming. The board is clear. We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, and it's just Mr.
All right. Now, I got this card, Stephen Procopio. All right. You wish to speak at this late hour? Please come forward.
I can't tell you I've got the same energy as
Yeah. Please, please be as brief as you can. We have to go on the floor.
Look, I already got a text from my wife, so I'm going to try and be brief.
Good. Please proceed, sir.
All right, I'm Dr. Stephen Procopio. I'm the president of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. Thank y'all very much for being here. I'm glad I can be here as well. PAR was founded in 1950. We're an independent, nonpartisan research and watchdog group. We work on a lot of different things, including fiscal issues, also good government issues, like ethics, open meetings, public records. So we will be back in front of this committee frequently, and I look forward to working with you. When we looked at this issue, in terms of, there's one thing that's been brought up in terms of what some change might be needed, and it has to do with the congressional seating, and that is an issue. And so we brought that out. We actually wrote a commentary. I'm not going to pass that out. But we have a commentary where we recognize that. I do think we need to step back a second and sort of disentangle two things. There's partisan versus nonpartisan primaries, and we have a nonpartisan primary, which is, in fact, a rarity. There's only about 5 states that do that versus the 45 states that do have partisan primaries. But there's also open versus closed, and we are in the majority, where there's 35 states that have an open system versus what this would be as a closed system. Some general concerns of what we have, and I'm going to go quickly, would be cost, confusion, and disenfranchisement. In cost, in terms of the fiscal note, it was looking somewhere between $6 and $10 million. As I understand the amendments, this would essentially defer that, and we wouldn't have to deal that immediately, which is good, but there will still be probably some cost in the future. And confusion, and this kind of gets to the points that has been asked before, in the 2008 election, it was 2008 and 2010, and it was changed back actually in the 2010 legislative election. So they had the 2008 election, and then in the spring session, they actually changed it back, but kept it for the 2010 election that fall because they didn't want to create confusion. And it was Hunter Green, and I went back and watched the video, which y'all have great archives. It said basically, look, the issue here is cost and confusion, and there wasn't any argument from anyone. It was like, well, no, it doesn't. It was basically, that was accepted, and it was just a matter of moving back and how do you deal with the issue of the congressional seating. And it was passed overwhelmingly in both the House and the Senate. The disenfranchisement, and I think with a lot of gusto, Barry Ivey handled that, but we have 28% of voters probably won't be able to vote in primary elections depending on what the parties do. And so I think right there, in and of itself, that's one election they won't be able into and put their voice into. And if you see elections as a way of manifesting what the will of the people is and have a system that then represents them, I think that's an issue. And then we do have the specific issue that you might have no vote even in the general election in the examples that he brought up. I think in the example, Senator Carter, when you were talking about you had multiple Democrats running, 3 African-American Democrats and 1 white. In that case, it was always going to be a Democrat, and then no Republican in that election, and no unaffiliated, no independents, no parties. They wouldn't have gotten to vote all under this system because it would have been decided in the primary, and therefore no one, even the other party, wouldn't get to vote. Now, I don't think that's going to be particularly frequent, but it will happen, and I went back and looked. There's at least one case in the most recent elections that would have happened at the state level here. So I do think that is, in fact, an issue. And so you're looking at a system of the pluralities as well. It's another big issue. Pluralities really have two questions, really one big issue. I call it sort of the Ross Perot effect, is that if you can cause a warping of the effects of what people's actually intentions are to become the candidates if you don't make it go to a majority. Ross Perot's example, Representative Mina in the 23rd district, he wouldn't have won if they wouldn't have run off the election. So there's a lot of different things. Again, I don't think that's going to be particularly common, but I do think it is also more common the lower level of government you go to. So I think it's probably going to be less common at the congressional election as it would be for state legislature. And so some of this is cleaned up by the amendment as well. Overall, and hopefully that was relatively quick, one other thing I have, in terms of information, most southern states have a primary for their parties. Most of the southern states. The only one that doesn't is Florida. They don't have a party primary runoff. Every other state in the South basically does. But what Florida does have, and this is interesting, is it was on a universal primary contest. So if you have an example where they're all Republicans or all Democrats and there's no one else in the race, that it would be decided in the primary. They declared a universal primary contest, in which case every voter can then vote. It would essentially turn into the Louisiana system. And so in that case, you deal with the issue of disenfranchisement because it says, look, this race is going to be decided in the primary. In that case, we have to open it up. I'm not suggesting that's what you should do, but it's a type of example of something you should maybe look at, if not here, maybe in a future session. Overall, I think there are a lot of issues. There are some potential ways to solve that. I think the amendment solves a lot of that. Pushing it back, I think, is probably a good idea, given how huge the change would be. And so all of those things I can support. Generally, given the cost, I think it's probably a good idea. And I also think, at least from PAR's perspective, it's more cost for less choice. I do understand the sort of affiliation issues, but I do think it's probably difficult to explain from our perspective. So given that, I'm happy to any questions, or I'm happy to also leave too.
Thank you very much, for your testimony. There are no questions. We appreciate you coming today.
Thank you all for your no questions. I appreciate that.
All right, Representative Emerson, where did she go to close on her bill? All right, we have one other bill, and let me just let the general public understand we do have to go to the floor after we finish, and so if we can govern ourselves accordingly, that would be much appreciative. Where's Representative Emerson? Okay, Representative Emerson, to close on your bill.
All right. Thank you, Chairman, members. I'll be very brief. I appreciate the time tonight. Again, we are trying to institute something that a lot of other states have in a party primary process, and I believe this is the best way to go, and I appreciate the amendments, and I think hopefully we're at a point we're in better agreement. Appreciate favorable passage.
All right, you've heard the testimony on House Bill 17. Members, what's your pleasure? Senator Reese moves that we report the bill as amended. Are there any objections? Senator Senator Carter objects. All right, Secretary, call the roll. If you're in favor of reporting the bill as amended, you would vote aye. If you oppose, you would vote no. Secretary, call the roll.
Senator Miguez
Yes.
votes yes. Senator Carter votes no. Senator Fazy
Yes.
votes yes. Senator Jenkins votes no. Senator Klein-Peter votes yes. Senator Miller votes yes. Senator Reese votes yes.
All right, you got 5 yeas and 2 nays, and the bill is reported as amended.